Story 1. Before I begin, let's get one thing out of the way. I'm a stripper at Bear Asset's Exotic Cabaret. An exotic dancer, if you think that sounds classier. Me? I don't care. It's what I do, not who I am. My stage name is Sherbert, in honor of my great-uncle Herbert, who died last year. Yeah, I know it's a weird way to commemorate someone, but whatever. I needed a name. Now I know what some of you must be thinking. No, I'm not damaged goods. My daddy loved me just fine, and I'm not some destitute heroin addict selling myself to get a fix. It's nothing like that. Like a lot of my fellow strippers, I'm a student. This job pays decent enough, and the work hours are great and don't interfere with classes. But this story isn't about my career path, it's a story about a door. A door mostly out of sight from the main area, but visible from up on the stage. A door that, as far as I could tell, only opened when patrons dropped obscenely large stacks of money. A door to a room so private that none of the other girls I asked knew what was on the other side. Yesterday, I went through that door, and this is what I saw. As you probably already guessed, the turnover rate at a strip club is pretty high. Sure, there are a few regulars who stick around for a couple years, but those girls are exceptions. It wasn't uncommon for me to show up for my shift, only to find one of the girls missing. I'd ask, "Where's Candy?" And someone would reply, "Found herself a sugar daddy." Sometimes it'd be something a little more disgusting, like last week, when I asked, "Hey, where's Cherie?" And Ginger replied, "The boss found out she's only 16. Got canned. 16 years young. Can you imagine resorting to stripping at that age? Terrible. Thankfully, the boss was vigilant and always managed to catch the underage ones within a few weeks. You know, before too much damage was done. He was a nice enough guy, but he had the worst fashion sense. He'd wear these Bermuda shorts with unbuttoned Hawaiian shirts showing off his curly mane of chest hair and this gaudy gold medallion with a red gemstone dangling from his beefy neck. He loved that damn medallion so much, he had an identical one on a bus in his office. In case the first one got dirty, I guess. He was mostly normal, if not a little shady looking in the way that all strip club owners look. Most importantly, he treated us with respect. At worst, he'd playfully slap one of us on the butt. But aside from that, was very hands off the merchandise. Yesterday, the boss asked me to train Cherie's replacement. I arrived at work about half an hour early to pick out props and stuff, but got distracted by that damn door. For the first time since I started working at Bear Assets, it was left untended. I know I shouldn't have, but I let my curiosity get the better of me. I walked over and boldly tried the handle. To my surprise, it was unlocked. I quickly glanced around the room to make sure I was still alone before opening the door and stepping into the mysterious room. Inside was a miniature version of our main stage facing 2 rows of leather recliners, each with their own tray table. The walls were lined floor to ceiling with silky red curtains that curved in the corners. In the back was a small bar with bottles filled to the brim and crystal glasses more polished than I'd ever seen at any strip club. Clearly, this was some sort of VIP lounge. I circled around the room, wondering why I'd never been invited to dance here before. Hell, wondering how many girls had lied to my face about getting the opportunity. I was actually a little angry and jealous about it, to be honest. I was about to head back when I noticed one little detail that didn't quite make sense. The stage fed directly into a black concrete wall instead of curtains to conceal a backstage area. As far as I could tell, there was only one door in the room, and I had never seen any of the girls going through it. So I couldn't help but wonder how they got inside for their private shows. It had to be the red curtains, I figured. There must have been a door hidden behind one of them. If I slipped behind the curtains and circled around the room, I could find the entrance and figure out who'd been lying to me. That's exactly what I did, but it didn't go quite according to plan. See, I was about 3/4 of the way across the room with nothing but concrete walls to show for my troubles when I heard the doorknob turn. Afraid of getting in trouble, I bolted towards the corner, hoping to hide myself in the gap between the connecting walls and the curved curtains. There was just enough space for me. And since I was standing right where 2 curtains connected, I was able to see the backs of the sofas and stage from where I was. The boss walked inside, fanning a wad of $100 bills as he escorted a somewhat young businessman to the front row. "Let's make your first time special," he said. I couldn't see it, but I could hear the slimy smile on my boss' face as he continued. "Would you like your very own cherry to pop? I have a new one, ripe and ready for the picking." Disgusting. We all knew these things happened behind closed doors, But up until that point, I'd been able to maintain the false belief that we didn't resort to that kind of business at Bare Assets. The businessman nodded. Excellent. Let's begin, answered the boss, as he clapped his hands together. Music started playing loudly in the room. The walls must have been remarkably soundproof. My eyes scanned the curtains, waiting to see movement so I could see which of my colleagues was good enough for the VIP room, which one was better than me. There was no way I could have anticipated what was about to happen. The curtains didn't move. Someone walked on stage, seemingly stepping right through the concrete wall. She was naked, her slender body hunched over protectively, her arms crossed over her midsection with her hands landing near their opposite shoulders. She was shaking, sobbing. She was translucent. I couldn't really tell just how translucent she was until she reached about halfway up the stage, because the black wall behind her had added an illusion of pigment to her form, like looking at water through a colored glass. Or, well, the opposite. But as she moved closer to the pole, I could see the folds in the red curtains behind her, showing through her body. Her entire body looked like it had been washed in an old-timey sepia tone, her hair and skin all a similar burnt brown color. She stopped at the pole and continued to sob. The boss grunted angrily. Don't be so shy. Show him your true colors. Show him your true colors. She whimpered quietly, holding herself tighter. She was shaking her head, mouthing the words, please, no. The boss stood up and walked over to the stage, placing a hand on his medallion. I'm giving you one chance. You've seen what'll happen if you don't do what I say. She flinched. The businessman leaned forward on his seat and cupped a hand to his chin, watching with perverted interest. The boss lost his patience, and the surreal show became even more surreal. He grabbed his stupid, gaudy medallion and jerked on it once. There was a sound like static, followed by what looked like a bolt of red lightning shooting out of him and whipping against the translucent being. She screamed in agony and fell to her knees, balling herself up in the fetal position. Show us your true colors, whispered the boss. The ripple of static came back, but this time, the girl obeyed. She slowly sat up, her arms releasing her chest in defeat. I had a feeling no one was looking at her breast, though. There was no reason to stare at her tits, when something more magnificent was hiding inside. I don't know how to explain it. It was this vessel of light right in the middle of her chest, like she'd swallowed a neon tube or something. It was the purest, lightest blue I'd ever seen in my life. Tendrils of light flickered around it like a fire. It was beautiful. It was hypnotic. It was like looking right into her soul. I felt an overwhelming feeling of contentment washing over me, like being in my mother's arms. Then I recognized her face. Cherie. My stomach dropped, yet I couldn't shake the warmth and joy I was experiencing. It was like there were two versions of me in my head, one that was mesmerized and another who was horrified. Then, whimpering, Cherie stood up and began to dance on stage, bearing it all. She had no clothes to hide under, no mask of makeup to wear, no skin to hide behind. She had been stripped in the ultimate sense of the word. I was seeing her very essence, her soul, forced to parade around like a slave for the amusement of some sick son of a bitch. The song came to an end, and when it did, I noticed her beautiful blue light growing just a tad bit duller. The boss waved his hand over his medallion, and Cherie disappeared. The room felt cold. So, what did you think? He asked. The businessman applauded enthusiastically. The boss ran a hand over his bald head. And think she's new? Wait until you get a load of one with a bit of experience. The hands-on ones they're something, all right. The hands-on ones they're something. I'll pay you right now, interrupted the businessman. Right now. Double what I paid to get in here. I want the full package. The boss laughed triumphantly. You're about to get the best lap dance of your life, my friend. He waved his hand over the medallion. This time, 3 women appeared on stage. I recognized 2. I thought one had graduated and moved away, and I'd been told the other had gotten married to some rich guy. Lies. All lies. The 2 weren't hiding like Cherie had hidden. Their body language seemed a little insecure, but they were exposed. They both had colors inside, just like Cherie. One was a beautiful dark green, and the other was burgundy. I still got a flush of contentment from looking at them, but it was nowhere near as exhilarating as when I'd looked into Cherie's colored vessel. The third dancer, the one I didn't recognize, had gray on the inside. Out of the 3, she seemed the least bothered by her predicament. She had her legs spread out, her shoulders leaned back, her arms loose at her sides, and the dull light between her breasts exposed for the world to see. A new song started playing, and the trio began to dance like it was going out of style. Damned if I know how they managed to touch the pole yet walk through walls, but somehow they managed. They slid up and down and twirled around. I could feel myself getting lost in the movements, eyes transfixed on the 3 lights. I might even have been a little roused, to be honest. I'm not even into women. There was something in the air. My breaths were shallow and my heart was thrashing. I wanted them. I wanted them so bad. Ray jumped off the stage and began grind against the businessman without a speck of hesitation. And let's be clear here, I'm not slut-shaming the ghostly stripper. It's just that all the others seemed more guarded, but she had absolutely no restraint whatsoever. I wondered why she was different. She groped her body and presented every piece of it to him. His hands hovered over her translucent flesh tentatively, the only thing stopping him likely being years of having to obey the no-touching rule. Do a reach inside. The businessman seemed hesitant for a moment, but then Gray tossed a leg over his lap and began to gyrate her hips seductively. He plunged his hands into her chest and touched the dull light swirling inside. His body arched back as he let out a groan of ecstasy. I could only imagine what it must have felt like, holding the very core of someone in his hands. I pushed my back against the wall, trying to imagine myself doing the same, trying to experience the rush vicariously through him. I could feel the pressure building inside. Building. I needed release, The room became cold as an explosion of frigid air swept out of Gray like a full-body sneeze. Green and burgundy disappeared. The light in Gray's chest suddenly became black. Her eyes became hollow, her hair unkempt, and her body seemed to deflate and sharpen, as though her invisible skin and muscles had turned to a thin cloth draped over her bones. She let out an ear-piercing shriek as she lunged towards the businessman's neck, fang-mouth ready to bite down into his skin. The boss clutched his medallion in one hand and snapped his fingers with the other. Red light came pouring out of Gray, but not the same kind of light. It was like she was burning from the inside out. It took only a split second for her body to disintegrate to ashes. The boss chuckled. Sorry about that. I was sure we'd get at least 1 more week out of her. The businessman jumped to his feet, eyes wide with terror. Aye, he stuttered. I assure you, you are in no danger here. Why don't I summon up a new start at the boss? But he was quickly interrupted. And no more No. The boss let out a disapproving grunt. This is your fault. I had no idea he was talking to until he turned and looked straight at me. I could feel myself becoming numb. I hadn't noticed the gust of wind had blown half the curtain off of me. I hadn't realized I was standing in plain sight now. He continued, I suppose it's fortunate you're here. I just so happen to need a replacement. Let's see what your true colors are. He ran towards me. I was literally cornered. There was nothing I could do. Nowhere I could run. I tried, of course. I barely had time to take a step to the right before he was on me. His meaty fingers squeezed my throat so hard, I thought my head might pop off. I tried to fight him off, slapping him and clawing at his arms, but he was bigger and stronger than me. In the one-sided tussle, I noticed that damn tacky medallion swinging from his neck. I grabbed the chain and twisted it in one quick, jerky motion, hoping I could counter-choke him. Instead of tightening around his neck, the chain broke off surprisingly easily and my arm whipped back violently, sending the medallion crashing against the wall. I heard a crackle as the gemstone broke. I was quickly running out of air. My vision was starting to blur. I thought I was going to die, and then I saw a light. No, not the light at the end of the tunnel, a soft pink light. A light that filled me with a sense of security. Then a pale blue one. Purple, green, yellow. More and more lights blinked into existence, until we were surrounded by at least a dozen of them, all encased in the silhouettes of busty dancers. They grabbed the boss' fingers and began prying them away from my throat. I fell to the ground and gasped for air as they pulled him away from me. Gagging and coughing, I crawled to the bar and grabbed the first bottle I laid my hands on. I found the strength to force myself to my feet and staggered to the boss, now being held down on his knees by the spectral dancers. He would never do this to anyone else. I was going to make sure of it. I'm not a violent person. I wouldn't hurt a soul. Good thing he didn't have one. He was a monster. I swung the bottle at his face with all my might. Surprisingly, it didn't break like you see in the movies. The boss screamed profanities at me as blood began to ooze out of his nose. He kept trying to break free, but with a dozen of his victims pinning him down, he wasn't going anywhere. He deserved every bludgeoning strike to the head. He deserved the bruises and the swelling. He deserved the humiliation. I kept at it until he stopped moving. Once I thought he was dead or at least unconscious. I dropped the bloodied bottle and backed into the curtains. It was over, or so I thought. The girls might have saved me, but they didn't do it entirely for altruistic purposes. I found that out when they dragged him to the stage and started tearing away his clothes, exposing his disgusting blubbery body. I remember thinking it was going to be hard to explain this to the police. Turns out, by the time they were done with him, I wouldn't have to. See, once his clothes were off, they continued. They started peeling away his skin like a used Band-Aid. The strips of flesh burned away as soon as they were pulled, and in their place, I could see the same brownish translucent skin. Part of me was disappointed he was too dead to feel the pain, but I wasn't disappointed for long. As soon as they pulled a strip of flesh away from his mouth, I saw the astral version of his mouth open wide. He was screaming a silent scream of agony. That was more like it. He was aware of what was happening to him. He could feel every little tug. Good. They stripped away the flesh from his chest, revealing a disgusting brown nugget where his color should have been. It barely had any light to it. It just looked like digested filth. The girls kept his arms for last, and as I watched them expose the most private parts of him, I wondered why. It was so he couldn't cover up. It was to make sure he'd feel the humiliation of everyone seeing his true colors, his disgusting innards. As soon as his arms were free of his real skin, he covered up and started sobbing like a giant bald baby. Now, the girls were vindicated. They slowly backed away, and one by one, the lights went out and they disappeared. I'd like to think they moved on to a better place. At the very least, their torment was over. As for the boss, I remembered the extra medallion he kept in his office. I wasn't sure exactly how to use it, but after waving it around him a few times, his silhouette disappeared. So I think I managed to trap him inside the same way he trapped the girls. I kept his gaudy medallion. I'd like to say I did it to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, but I'm not going to lie. A part of me really needs to see those true colors again. Story 2. His Tinder profile said he was 45, but he looked to be in his early 30s at most, looking for a sugar baby, $700 weekly. No sex. It sounded too good to be true, but as a broke university student, I was willing to take my chances. I swiped right, and Tinder let me know it was a match. His message came seconds later. Hey, their sweetheart. I cringed at that word. I hated it. But $700 was $700, so I sucked it up and replied. Hey, his name was Jack, and he told me he owned his own business, although he never specified what kind of business it was. We talked for a while before he asked me for my Venmo to send me the first payment. After a few minutes, I got the notification. I stared at the $700 for at least 20 minutes, expecting to wake up from a dream at any second. But it wasn't a dream. You still there? I clicked on the message. Yeah, sorry. If you don't mind me asking, what are you looking for in return? I stared at the chat until he replied. I'm just looking for you to do a few favors for me. That sounded like it was going to be sexual to me. Like what? For example, the first thing I need you to do is pick up a delivery for me. That sounded innocent enough, but I was still expecting there to be some kind of twist. $700 to pick up a package. Come on, even I wasn't that naive. From the post office or something. No. I'll send you the address, but I'd rather not do this through Tinder. You got Kick, or you can give me your number. Kick. What was this? 2011. I decided to give him my number instead, and he texted me the address immediately, followed by the address to his house, where I would have to drop off the package. I'm not home right now, but there's a key on the bottom of the blue flower pot near the door. Go inside and put the package on the coffee table in the living room. Make sure that you lock the door when you go inside the house, and then lock again when you leave. I grabbed my car keys and wallet and got into my car, putting the address into Google Maps. Got it. Amwa. My phone buzzed as I backed out of my driveway. I'm serious. Lock the door both times, please. I thought that was a little excessive, but I promised him that I would. The house looked abandoned. It had a broken chain-link fence around it, with a small door that was hanging onto dear life. It stuck out like a sore thumb, surrounded by houses that were a lot nicer than this one in comparison. I looked up to see a man standing in the open doorway of the house. He took up almost the entire space, his head skimming the top of the door frame. He was huge in height and muscles, and his entire torso was covered in tattoos. Yeah, I guess. I replied, not moving from my spot on the sidewalk. Stay right there, he said. I did. I actually don't think I would have moved if he had asked me to. I looked around and realized that there was no one else on this street. I was a 21-year-old woman alone in the street. I gripped my car keys. A few minutes later, the man came back out carrying a cardboard box. It was about the size of a shoebox, but stained and damp on some of the corners. "Can you open your car?" he asked. I opened the trunk, not wanting that inside on my car seats, and he set it in all right. "There you go," he said. "Thanks." I walked around to the driver's side of the car and opened the door. "Oh, and one more thing." I looked at him. "Watch out," he said. I didn't reply. I blasted my music as I drove to Jack's house, hoping it would drown out my anxiety. It didn't. I parked my car in the stone driveway and stayed inside the car, admiring the house. It was a huge house with stone pillars on the front porch and the greenest grass I had ever seen in my life. I turned the car off and got out. I grabbed the package and walked to the front door, getting the key from where he said it would be. I opened the door and stepped in, closing it behind me. I thought about what he had said about locking the door when I got inside. I thought that was a little overboard, but as I stared at the closed door, something made me reach out and lock it. I walked inside, my feet cushioned by the thick maroon carpet, and admired the inside of the house. All the furniture was wooden and looked incredibly expensive. I would probably finish school a dozen times with the money that it took to furnish this place. I set the package down on the coffee table, and as I walked back to the door, I heard a phone ringing from somewhere inside the house. I froze. In my pocket, my phone buzzed. I took it out to look. "Don't answer any calls that aren't from Marvin." I put my phone back and followed the sound of the phone, poking my head into a few different rooms before I found it in an office. I walked over to the desk and looked at the caller ID. Incoming call from Jack. That was odd. I grabbed my phone to look at the message again. I was starting to get a little bit creeped out and decided I wouldn't answer, just to be safe, and left the house, remembering to lock the door as I left. I've done a few more favors for Jack since then. I drove a BMW to a random park in another city, only to get out and drive a different car back to Jack's house. He had me meet one of his employees at lunch, who then gave me a briefcase to deliver to the first house I had gone to and told me he would know if I looked inside. On several occasions, he asked me to drive down to that same house and stay with the guy, whose name was Julio, for a certain amount of time. In total, I've made around $3,500. Most recently, Jack asked me to stay in his house overnight. I woke up to a text message from him. "I need you to spend the night at my house." I hadn't ever seen him in person, but I had talked to him on the phone a few times. He proceeded to tell me he would pay me $1,000 to spend the night at his house, provided that I followed a few rules. I drove to his house that evening. The driveway was empty, and it normally was, but the porch light was on. I walked up, unlocked the door, went inside, and then locked again. Everything in the house looked the same. Jack had told me over the phone that he would leave the list of rules on the dining room table. I set all my stuff down in the living room. My bags looked like garbage compared to the fancy furniture in there. I wandered into the kitchen, and then to the dining room. Sure enough, there was a piece of paper on the wooden table, held down by an empty glass. "Lock the door when you come in. Only answer calls from Marvin. Don't turn on any faucets between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter who they say they are, after 10 p.m. If the door to the closet at the end of the hall is open, sleep in the library. If closed, sleep in any of the bedrooms. The gardener comes at midnight. If he starts knocking on the windows, hide. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. I'll pay you in the morning. Good night." I made sure to follow all the rules. To be honest, I was regretting my decision. But, seeing as I was already here, and I was getting paid, I decided to stay anyway. I figured as long as I followed all the rules, I'd be perfectly fine. Still, it felt a little odd. Nevertheless, I lounged around the house for a few hours, as I was planning on going to sleep around 9, since that's the time that all the weird shit would begin to happen. At 8:50 a.m., I brushed my teeth, using the faucet for the last time before 9. I checked the closet in the hallway, and upon seeing that it was open, I moved my stuff into the library and got ready to sleep on the couch. I locked the doors, just in case, and laid on the couch, scrolling through my phone. I hadn't gotten any more messages from Jack, and I started to think up scenarios and reasons as to why he had such strict peculiar sets of rules in his house. I had dozed off at some point because, at exactly 10:16 p.m., I was woken up by the doorbell ringing. I was about to get up to check, but then I remembered the rule. Don't open the door for anyone no matter who they say they are after 10 p.m. I stayed on the couch, trying not to move, paranoid that they would hear even the slightest sound. It's the police. Open up. I didn't move. Hello, it's the police. Open up or we're coming in. I still didn't move, but I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. There was silence for a while after that. Then the doorbell rang again. Hey, it's Jack. It sounded like Jack, but still I didn't get up. He would have a key, wouldn't he? Why would he need me to let him in? This continued for almost a full hour. Different people would ring the doorbell, announce themselves, and then disappear when I didn't respond. I was finally able to fall asleep, and the gardener never came. When I woke up the next morning, I heard someone in the kitchen. I got up slowly and unlocked the door as quietly as possible, taking my phone with me and walking across the living room and into the kitchen. I stopped at the entrance and peered in. It was Jack. He was standing in front of the stove, stirring something as the coffee machine brewed coffee on the counter behind him. Hey, good morning, he said when he saw me. Hi, I replied. Nervous, I hadn't seen him in person before, but he looked exactly like his pictures online. Scrambled eggs, he asked. Yeah, thanks, I replied. I ate my breakfast and drank some coffee in silence. So how was it? It was okay. Nothing super freaky happened. Cool, he replied. There was an awkwardness in the room. I think I'm gonna go now, I have class. I trailed off. I didn't. But I really wanted to get out of there. Oh, no, yeah, sure. I'll talk to you some other time. I grabbed my stuff and he walked me to my car. I could see him standing in the driveway, staring at me as I left. When I got home, I unpacked all my stuff and noticed that I still had the list with me. I sat on my bed and read again. I felt my body tense up as I realized that I had forgotten something. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Turn the TV on and let it play on static through the night. Do not forget to do this. Do not forget to do this. I stared at the words on the page until they lost meaning. Beside me, my phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. It was the $1,000 payment. I looked at my phone and then back at the list. Maybe it wasn't an important step. As I was thinking this over, a text from Jack came in. I'm not in town right now. I should be back next week, so you're free from running any more errands for me until then. Just sent the payment. Go do something fun. I stared at the message and read again. And once more for good measure. And once more for good measure. I'm not in town right now. I thought back to this morning and how Jack was in his house. How he gave me breakfast. I'm not in town right now. Within minutes, a new text came in, this time from a number that I didn't recognize. The text was followed by a picture of Jack, or whoever this version of Jack was, standing in front of the TV. I didn't respond. Next came another picture. This one was of the outside of my house. It was followed by another text. Watch out. I didn't leave my house for almost an entire week. The only reason I didn't stay indoors for longer is that I had an important exam in one of my classes that I absolutely had to be present for. That also didn't help with the anxiety I was feeling. As I drove to campus, I kept my eyes glued to my surroundings, almost running to stop signs and a red light. I kept expecting Jack, or fake Jack I suppose, to pop out randomly on the side of the road, or in the car next to me, or the car behind me. I constantly glanced at my rearview mirror, trying to figure out if the black truck behind me had been there this whole time, or if it was different than the one I had seen 10 minutes ago. I hadn't told him where I went to school, so maybe he wouldn't know. Then again, I hadn't told him where I lived either, and he seemed to figure that one out rather quickly. I hadn't texted the real Jack since the incident had happened. I mean, I didn't even know what I was supposed to say. My plan, as foolish as it was act as if all was well. I wasn't going to stir the pot by telling him I had already fucked up, so instead, I was going to wait until he realized that something was wrong. Hopefully, he wouldn't. I will admit that not telling him was more difficult than I had thought, and I found myself constantly checking my phone for texts from Jack, but none appeared. I finished my exam that day, sure that I had failed due to my lack of focus, and drove back home, where I found Julio standing in my driveway. He was looking down at his phone, and I attempted to keep driving down the street before he saw me, but I wasn't fast enough. He glanced and began walking towards my car as I slowly pulled into the driveway, locking my doors and trying to remain calm. Instead of shifting into park, I kept my foot on the brake and shifted into reverse, fully ready in case I needed to make a quick getaway. I sat in the driver's seat, looking forward at my front door. I wondered for a second if I would be able to get inside and lock the door before Giulio got to me. Suddenly, he leaned down and knocked on the window, making me jump. I turned to look at him and said nothing. "Roll your window down," he said. I pressed the button for a split second, making only a tiny crack of open space. "You know, it's not me you should be afraid of." I looked at him and glanced at my rearview mirrors, trying to see if any of my neighbors were outside. But they weren't, and I was alone with no witnesses. "You fucked it up," he said. "Lean against my car. I told you to watch out. And you didn't. They always miss at least one." I looked up at him but said nothing because I honestly had no clue what to say. "Get out of the car. We're going inside." He tapped his hand on the roof of my car and walked towards my front door. I thought about driving away, but I wasn't sure where I would go, and a part of me wanted to hear him out. So I found myself parking the car, turning off the engine, and letting Giulio into my house. He took a seat on my couch and glanced around my living room. "This is fancy for a college student. You buy this with Jack's money?" he asked. I rolled my eyes as I stood in front of him. "Why did you want to come in?" "All right, touchy subject," he said, shrugging. "Which Jack?" "What?" he snapped, leaning over and resting his elbows on his knees. "What do you mean?" "The one who appeared in the house. Jack isn't back yet. I came here to tell you that you forgot to lock the door after your little house-sitting gig. Which Jack won't be pleased about. He's gotten rid of girls for much pettier shit than this." I said nothing and stared at Giulio while he stared back, waiting for me to explain myself. His use of the words "gotten rid of" made me nervous, and I wondered what he meant by that. "Was there someone else in the house?" Jack. Jack was in the house that morning before I left." "How do you suppose that happened?" "Because Jack hasn't come back from his trip yet," I shrugged. Giulio stood up, sighing in annoyance. "Fine. You know what? I originally came over here to ask you for a share of the cash you got for your poor house-sitting job. But it seems to me that you probably fucked up more than I originally thought. So I'm just going to stay out of whatever this is. Good luck." He walked over and opened my front door, waving to me as he left, leaving me standing in my empty house. I ran to the door and locked it as soon as he was gone, and started to freak out once again. I thought about what I was going to do if Jack came back from his trip and found out that I had messed up. What if Giulio was right and someone had broken into the house and robbed him? Maybe I just thought I saw Jack, but maybe it was just some other stranger who looked like him. My mind was going a mile a minute as I tried to figure out what to do. I paced around my house for a few hours before I finally decided that I was going to drive back to Jack's house and make sure that no one had broken in. If they had, I would simply make an anonymous police report or something. Besides, the only way he would ever know that it was my fault would be if Giulio snitched on me, which it didn't seem like he was planning on doing anymore. I made the drive over in silence, trying to control my breathing so that I didn't have a meltdown on the highway. I finally pulled into the driveway and turned the engine off, but I couldn't work up the courage to get out of the car. I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the giant house, trying to force myself to unbuckle my seatbelt, open the door, and get out of the car. The house, which once looked impressive, now made me feel anxious and out of place. I couldn't stop myself from imagining all sorts of horrible scenarios that I could stumble upon once I opened the door. I thought about how many possible hiding places there were in a house that large. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally decided to get out of the car and walk towards the front door. I hesitated for a few seconds before taking a deep breath and pushing the door open. Only it didn't open because it was locked. I assumed that Giulio had probably locked it and looked for the key on my keychain. I unlocked the door and stepped into the living room, taking a look around. Everything looked normal enough. There were no signs of breaking and entering or anything like that, and I was glad that Giulio had come over and realized my mistake before someone else had. I closed the door behind me, this time double-checking that I locked it, and began to make my way further into the house. I went into the library first, which looked the same as it had when I left it. Next, I made my way through the living room, glancing around to see if anything was out of place. but nothing was. I was starting to feel better now that I had confirmed that no one had broken in and ruined the place. That feeling was short-lived, however, when I walked into the kitchen. It was a complete mess. Both the fridge and the freezer were wide open, all the containers of food emptied out. There were empty boxes of frozen foods tossed inside the freezer and on the kitchen floor. There were a few trays of meat that were laying out on the table and the counters, and some of the red juice from the meats had been spilled inside the fridge and now dripped down onto the floor. I noticed that while there hadn't been much food in there in the first place, it was all gone. As I got closer to the fridge, I realized that it wasn't cool, and the light inside the fridge wasn't working either. I assumed that whoever ate all the food also unplugged it for some odd reason. I stepped over an empty carton of orange juice and an empty crate of eggs as I made my way towards the stove, where I found stacks of unwashed pans. One of them was still hot, meaning that it was only recently taken off the burner. There were eggshells all over the counter, and I thought back to that morning when Jack, or whoever that was, had made me eggs for breakfast. I walked back out of the kitchen, careful not to step on the mess that littered the floor, and made my way down the hallway. I spotted the door at the end of the hall, and this time it was closed. As I continued to walk down the hall, I couldn't help but notice how eerily quiet it was in the house. I couldn't even hear the sound of the heater running. As I passed the thermostat in the hallway, I saw that it wasn't working. The screen was off and there was nothing on it, like it had been turned off or something. I leaned forward and pressed a few of the buttons, but none of them worked. I poked my head into the study, but that was also empty, although I did see that the landline had been used recently, and whoever used it didn't put it back. The handheld part was hanging off the side of the desk, and I stepped in, grabbing the phone and holding it up to my ear. But there was only silence. I put it back and followed the cord with my eyes. It was connected to the wall, but it seemed like there was no power in the house, which explained the refrigerator and the thermostat. I walked out of the study and headed down the hall again, but I froze in my tracks when I noticed that the door at the end of the hall was open now. Someone was in the house. I reached into my back pocket and grabbed my phone, checking to see if maybe I had missed a text from Jack, but I had no signal inside the house. I held my phone in my hand anyway, hoping I'd pick up enough signal to call for help, and began to back away from the door, listening carefully for any footsteps or noises that would let me know where the intruder was. As I spun around, I found myself face to face with Jack, or whoever it was that I was looking at. I knew he was the same man I had seen that morning, but no, I had no idea who he really was. "Sorry," I said, startled. "Which one are you?" he asked, squinting at me. He was dressed in a stained gray t-shirt and old pajama bottoms that looked like they had been purchased 30 years ago. "What? You're the new one, right? The one from the other day. You're the one who forgot to turn the television on, yeah. I'm so sorry." I stopped talking as he started laughing. "Sorry," he asked, grinning. "I should be thanking you. Who are you?" I asked him. I stared at his face, and he looked exactly like Jack. "I'm Jack." His expression changed, and he narrowed his eyes at me. "Did he tell you when he would be back?" "The exact date?" I shook my head, confused. "But you can ask him." "Right. I don't know. He hasn't contacted me in a few days, damn it. I was hoping it wouldn't be that bad. Can you explain to me what the hell is going on?" I asked him. Something felt off to me, and chills shook my entire body. Part of me regretted not going with my original plan of acting like everything was okay. I didn't want to stay in the house any longer, and there was really nothing that I could do anyway. Besides, I was getting a bad feeling from this guy claiming to be Jack. I slowly stepped past him, glancing back behind me as I continued to walk into the living room and towards the front door. I found myself walking faster and faster until I was basically running and throwing myself at the front door. I couldn't help but shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen if I stayed in this house any longer. I unlocked the door, but just as I was about to open it, I heard the lock slide back into place, only it sounded a lot louder than usual. I jiggled the doorknob and realized that while the doorknob wasn't locked, something else was, and it was keeping me from opening the door. I began to freak out as I pulled on the door urgently, trying to get it to open, but something was keeping it shut. What the fuck? I glanced towards the hall as I heard another noise, but I quickly realized that it was the sound of air flowing through the vents. It seemed like the power was back, and somehow, Some sort of security system had activated at the same time. I looked down at my phone, and not only did I have a signal now, but I also had 3 messages from Jack. "I'm back. What happened? I know you're in the house." I looked around the room, trying to find him or any security cameras in the room that would be alerting him of my presence in the house. I didn't see any and grabbed my phone to text him back. "Are you here?" I held my phone in my hands as I made my way back towards the hallway to find the other Jack that I had seen earlier. If he even was another Jack. Maybe this was all the same person and he was just messing with me for some reason. A part of me thought that perhaps I deserved all of this for doing all of this in the first place. I mean, why was I so quick to agree to run random errands for a random man that I had never met? Sure, I needed the money. But going into a stranger's house has got to be on the list of the top 10 dumbest things you could ever do, especially considering the fact that no one knew where I was, and I didn't have a weapon to defend myself if I needed to. I stood in front of the closed door for a second before making my way over to a window. I tried to open it, but the security system had locked the window shut as well. I thought about breaking the window open, and I grabbed a sturdy-looking vase. I took a few steps back and then threw it at the window as hard as I could. The vase shattered as it made contact with the window glass, but the window was fine, unscratched. The only way I was getting out of here was through the door. But first, I had to disarm the security system somehow. I walked back to where I had left Jack, but he was gone and nowhere to be found. "Jack," I called. The door at the end of the hall was closed once again, and I began to walk towards it, peeking into each room as I passed it. But there was no one else in the house. As I reached the door, my phone buzzed in my hand. "You were supposed to follow the rules." I stood in front of the door, trying to work up the courage to open it and see what was in the room. "I know, I'm sorry. I came back to make sure everything was okay." I reached out and grabbed the doorknob, taking deep breaths. The buzzing in my hand startled me, and I ignored it as I turned the doorknob and pulled the door open. I stood in the threshold, at the top of a wooden staircase. Below was a badly lit basement. I slowly walked down the stairs, glancing at my phone. "You should have stayed away. You're really going to regret this." I didn't reply and kept walking until I was at the bottom of the stairs. While I wasn't sure what I was expecting, it wasn't the normal-looking basement apartment that I had stumbled into. I found Jack sitting on the couch against one of the walls. He was reading a magazine and glanced up when he heard me step off the stairs. "What are you doing?" He shot to his feet. "The door locked. I can't get out." "You're so fucking stupid," he exclaimed. "You weren't supposed to come back," he shouted. "I wanted to make sure everything was fine." I replied, "Who cares? You got $1,000 for house sitting. Why are you so angry? Why are you even here?" "You're clearly not Jack," I snapped. "How do you know yet?" "What? How do you know I'm not Jack? I look like the pictures you've seen." "Yeah, but Jack is on vacation," I replied. "How do you know?" he repeated. "What are you talking about? Have you ever met Jack in person? Have you ever talked to him on the phone, video call, anything other than a text message every few days?" I didn't reply, staring at him. He was right. He did look exactly like the photos I had seen on the Tinder profile. "That's what I thought. What are you saying exactly? How do you know that the person you've been talking to is a real person, as a matter of fact? How do you know that it's not me? Maybe this was my plan all along." At that point, it finally hit me. He was right. I didn't know if I was talking to a real person. All that I was doing random favors for someone with an internet profile who wanted to pay me money to do these things for some reason. I guess I had always felt that there was something off about a sugar daddy who was willing to pay someone to do things other than having sex with them, but I needed the money too badly to spend too much time questioning it. I was feeling even more scared now, and my palms were cold and sweaty as I stood there, waiting for him to do something. I could run back upstairs, but I didn't think I was fast enough to get out of there and find something to jam the door and keep him downstairs. I took a shaky, deep breath as I tried my hardest not to make it seem like I was scared. If Jack was dangerous, I didn't want to alert him of my plans to try and run. After a few seconds of silence, I glanced down at my phone to read the most recent text. But there were no new notifications. "That wasn't your phone," Jack said. I looked up at him and glanced at the phone sitting on a nearby table. Suddenly, he jumped towards me and I attempted to jump out of the way, but I was too slow. I saw Jack grab my arms and my phone fell out of my hands, and then everything went black. When I came to, I was on the living room couch and Jack was standing above me, looking down. What happened? I attempted to sit up, but I noticed that I was incredibly dizzy, and my left arm felt sore when I tried to prop myself up. I remembered Jack grabbing me earlier, and I figured he had gripped my arm too tight and must have bruised it in the process. You're finally up. Good. I slowly managed to sit up, wincing as I put weight on my left arm. I looked up at Jack, who was now standing a few feet away, with a bandage wrapped around his right bicep. What happened? I asked, looking at the bandage. I tried to shift my position on the couch and winced in pain as I put weight on my left arm again. I turned to look at it, trying to see if I had injured it somehow, and noticed that it was also wrapped in a bandage similar to Jack's. What happened? I repeated, looked down at my arm. I slowly reached over and started to unwrap the bandage until it came off and I was left staring at crudely done stitches on the inside of my bicep. What the fuck is this? I snapped. Sorry, Ivy, but you really shouldn't have come back, although. He began to back away from me, heading towards the front door. I watched as he easily opened it, and wondered how he disabled the lock and if he had been the one to activate it in the first place. He stepped out of the door and turned back to look at me. Good luck. I helped you out a bit while you were out, he said. I stood up and went after him. Surprisingly, he didn't try to run or back up and simply stood about a foot away from the front door watching me. As I attempted to step outside, a stabbing pain erupted in my left arm, traveling throughout the rest of my body until I felt like I was being stabbed everywhere at once. I fell to the floor crying out in pain. Once I was back in the house, the pain went away and I laid on the floor shaking in the aftermath as I stared up at Jack. What did you do to me? I asked. I had to get out. It's been 8 months. I'm sorry. You were just the first one to come back this time. I'm sure you're a good person, but I'm sorry. You're just going to leave me here. Julio will come by to give you food, and by the way, don't try to cut that thing out of your arm. This place is covered in cameras. If you do anything suspicious, Julio will see you. I learned that the hard way. I didn't know what to say, and I stood there in shock as I watched Jack walk over to my car and get in it, starting the engine and disappearing down the street. I finally shut the front door and locked it, turning back to face the empty house. I glanced at my phone, which was still on the couch, and remembered what Jack said before he left. I walked over, trying not to move my arm too much as I picked it up and turned it on. My Tinder profile was open, only it had been changed and now my profile bio read, looking for a sugar baby. $700 weekly. No sex. On the table next to it, there was a list of house-sitting rules, similar to the ones that I had found on the day that I had been here. At the bottom of the page there was a lime green sticky note that reads, "Sorry, I hope you're able to get out soon. Don't worry, maybe you won't be here for long." They almost always forget one of the rules. Good luck, Jack.